Hello. I think I'll have a word first, thinking of my birth again, that I was one of the first few children born on the NHS. When the National Health Service started, it caused quite a great change in people's lives. It's thought of or presented these days as a very positive thing. How could you possibly manage, especially for ordinary people, without it? I don't think there's really very much information yet again given to how the past actually was. Now, the tale that my parents and grandparents tell of before there was a National Health Service was that the Leicester Royal Infirmary was the local hospital, and that was kept going by money being raised at fetes in all the villages, and no doubt in the city of Leicester, which gave right of access to the hospital, free, certainly if you couldn't afford to pay, assuming your village had contributed suitably. In the case of Nor Bugh, there was a big fete held every summer, which raised a lot of money. Of course, the rich people were able to give more money than the poor. It was a fete, so it was also entertainment. It was also a social gathering. It had a big positive side. I remember that this is where the long tradition of May Day dancing was part of this. Nor Bugh had its own May Day dance, which will feature elsewhere perhaps in my talks, but it stopped when the need to raise money for the hospital stopped. The village still had a fete, but it was not the kind of thing that it was apparently before. It was a much bigger, more spectacular event when a lot of money was required to be raised in order to keep the hospital going and free for ordinary people. So the National Health didn't actually bring about free treatment. It meant that you didn't have a fete. All the work was done at the fete was done voluntarily. So basically, by doing voluntary work and then paying to have whatever was available at the fete, you had the entertainment, and you had the main health service. Now, the doctor is a different matter. You had to pay the doctor to come, but paying the doctor for the ordinary working man was possible, providing you didn't need him too often. And of course, within the family, they would help you if you had a particular crisis. Now, don't get me wrong, this is far from ideal. A free service, free to all, with the latest equipment and drugs is a great improvement. But you did have to pay national insurance out of your wages every week, and everyone paid the same. The rich didn't pay more. The stamp was a fixed price. But of course, it was the powers that be that decided what you did and what you didn't need and who would get what. And those that were very rich, of course, could pay. They paid the consultant to see him, and then he would arrange for you to jump the queue with the National Health Service. So it's a great improvement, but it's not quite the wonder compared to the old system that it's painted out to be. But anyway, we'll leave that there and say that, of course, the midwife came to where my parents lived, at my grandmother's house, for the birth. It was unheard of to have a birth in hospital, and it seemed apparently perfectly safe to have a baby at home. Now, it wasn't perfectly safe. Of course, there are advantages in being very near to the hospital if something goes wrong. But again, there's pluses and minuses. There's probably less chance of catching a disease from home. You would have caught it beforehand, wouldn't you? Than there is in going mixing with other people that are ill in hospital. So again, I just want to point out that there are pluses and minuses to these things. Don't just take it for granted that things have got better. over the years. It's better and worse. In the case of the health cover, it's definitely better rather than worse. Particularly, vaccinations have been a great improvement, and there's been lots of technical improvements in medicine. On the other hand, there has been abuse of antibiotics. Antibiotics are a lifesaver when needed, but they simply kill your bacteria in your gut unnecessarily if you take them when you're not ill. And of course, they breed resistance in the bacteria. So again, it requires care to get the full benefits from new things. It does require a lot of thought. Unfortunately, the people in power sometimes are brilliant and sometimes they're not. So we'll pass on then to where we got to. I suppose the next thing is getting the council house. We had the council house when I was about 1 year old. This is a very big plus, having somewhere of our own to live, a really big improvement. Now you'll notice that, of course, since then, you probably can't now get a council house. They're almost unobtainable. So we've definitely gone backwards. There's no question here about this. My parents, at a time of great housing shortage, in the village they came from, well, my mother came from, they were able to get a new house of their own. They were lucky, no doubt, but there was a whole estate, well, 2 roads anyway, of new council houses, the vast majority of which were occupied by young couples with a child, or expecting a child, from Nor Bugh. It's ideal, really. Owning your own house would be better, but having a house and paying rent, which was £1 and a shilling a week, I think, in those days. Now, in those days, that's not a fortune, but it wasn't just the rent, it was the rates and the water, as much water as you wanted to use. Now, not everybody can do that these days either, can they? So it's sort of still swings and roundabouts. I'd say on the whole, health is better, but housing is worse. And it's not because there are less houses as such. It's because of the way it's managed. The fact that now social housing is probably owned by, well, it's owned by the powers that be, the New World Order, the banks, not you anyway. And they're taking some sort of cut out of it. They're having a say in it. The actual social part of it it's given to the needy, and it's not given to them where they come from. Usually people lose their house in Syria and they end up with a house in Birmingham. What a shame they can't live in Syria, but nobody says this. They say either that, well, immigrants are wonderful people and must be helped. Well, I'm not saying they're not wonderful people. I'm saying that it's always a shame that people are displaced. There were far less people displaced after the Second World War than there are now. Another downhill slide, perhaps you might say. But we had a council house, and it was an excellent house. Of course, my mother did manage to complain about the fact that there was no windows at the front, because the stairs were across the front, and so she couldn't look out at people walking up and down the road. However, she could go into the back garden and talk to people that she knew from school who were in a similar position to herself with young children. She could talk across the fence to people whenever she had a spare, and they had a spare few minutes, which was quite often, in fact. So it was a very social thing. It held the community together rather than splitting it up, mixing it with people from all over the place. They were nearly all local people, although in fact there were 2 exceptions, one either side of us. The man's wife on one side was Scottish, and the man's wife on the other side was of Irish descent, but both the men were English and local, as indeed were everyone else in our part of the estate anyway. So at that point, I'll stop for now and I'll say bye.